Hello, everyone. Today we come from a different part of the world. We are in Singapore, and I'm with a friend of mine, Trey Mujakporue, and his surname is obviously not quite as complicated as mine, but still, I'm proud to be able to pronounce it. Trey is a very, very interesting person, 20 years veteran of cybersecurity, Europe, USA, Africa, and now Asia. In his experience, multitude of industries, fintech, financial services, retail, transportation, and most recently, part of a unicorn, which everyone knows in Southeast Asia, called Grab, a technology and fintech-oriented firm. So what an interesting lineup we have here today. We're talking about cyber security effectiveness. Trey and I, in our last conversation, had such an interesting conversation. It was only supposed to be a half an hour, and I think we had to kill it to an hour and 40. It was so interesting. So let's just jump straight in. Absolutely. Trey, we were talking about this. We were talking about culture and creativity, and everyone would say, why do we need to talk about culture and creativity in cybersecurity? And off we go. Share your thoughts, because I know we're going to unpack this in the next couple of sessions.
I think culture and creativity are incredibly important in cybersecurity for a variety of reasons. I guess the first one is cybersecurity, in my opinion anyway, is a discipline. And yes, it depends on what part of the cybersecurity discipline you work in. But it's a discipline in which thinking out of the box gives you rewards. It helps you do your job. Now, when you start looking at culture aligned with cybersecurity, not necessarily the culture of an organization, but maybe a social culture of a particular place that you're working in, you may find that culturally, people don't or not taught to think outside of the box, not following specific laid out rules, you're penalized for them. So if you live in a authoritarian country or authoritarian society, you'll probably find that you are always doing as you are told. Doing that in cybersecurity does not really pay dividends because you have to think outside the box. The people that you are defending against always think outside the box. They are looking to chain one exploit to another exploit, to take advantage of one loophole and use it in another place. And that's what they do. They think outside the box. In cybersecurity, we are in many ways like the police. We are always on the back foot. So how do you meet fire with fire if you're not thinking outside the box? And this is a big cultural thing as well. And like I mentioned, when you live in these societies, how you are raised and how you are brought up is in direct conflict with what I believe to be requirements to be a very good cybersecurity professional.
That's fascinating. And one small rabbit hole just to dive in. Literally last night, I was on the call with a client and we were talking about the end user awareness training, which obviously is so prevalent now, and their issues they have been targeted. And they were comparing that if someone does something wrong after their training, in other use cases in their business, they don't work with their client correctly. They actually re-go through training. And to some extent, it's a punishment. How can we punish people who are constantly under pressure? And the reason they're being attacked and these attacks are successful is because people are taking advantage of the culture of them under pressure doing their function and their job. How do we deal with that, Trey? Because beating someone over the head for making an error on some very, very sophisticated stuff coming their way that wasn't blocked by IT/security/etc. What do we do here? This is fascinating you mentioned this.
It is. And firstly, I'll say, I don't think there is one single answer. I have ideas of what I would do to help mitigate such a situation, and that's probably what I'm going to share with you now. Again, for me, culture is a big thing here. When people don't know what can happen in a situation, they are blasé about it, right? They carry on as if, nothing happens. When there is no material impact to an individual, then what do you really care? And I always go back to that analogy of a child playing with fire or an electrical socket, it only ever happens once, right? You stick a finger in an electrical socket, what happens? You get shocked. You're unlikely to do that again. Similarly, you're playing with fire. You play with fire, you get burnt, right? And people are unlikely to do that again. So I start to look at things when we talk about security awareness training and training of users and stuff like that. Typically, we are training these guys to be vigilant, to be aware of things. But these things tend not to have material impacts to them. So I click on a link, okay? You click on a link and what happens? Well, the company you get fished, the company loses a shed ton of money, but what happens to you, right? It's not necessarily your money. But again, for anybody that's been a victim, a personal victim of such a scam where they've gotten fished, they're not going to click on links anymore, right? And in the workplace, these are people that are going to be amazing advocates for other people, right? To say, listen, guys, this is what can happen. This happened to me. So I say all of this just to iterate a thinking point that I have, which is when you can make the impacts of failures in user awareness personal to the individuals that you're training, people are more likely to pay attention. People love anecdotal stories. We thrive on stories. This is what, the history of mankind has always been about: stories, 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 stories. Mm-hmm. So if you can actually get people who have been victims of this type of malicious activity to talk about their personal experiences to the individuals in your organizations, then this is, I believe, a way that will get people thinking more, will reduce the number of, errant security awareness training failures that you're likely to have. People will pay more attention to things because they've personalized it now.
With them, I heard it referred to as "what's in it for me."
What's in it for me?
An interesting anecdote I heard recently is that your point about a fish not being impactful to the end user. I heard of one where it was impactful so many ways to the end user. Why? Because the fish happened at payroll time. So not only did their payroll get delayed, all their colleagues' payroll got raided. So then there's the social pressure that was the person that did it. But yes, what do, Trey? We are sending people more and more and more legitimate SaaS links. We implement Salesforce. We implement SAP. We implement XYZ in a cloud-orientated or Atlassian. These wonderful platforms. Now we're sending people links that look long and obscure all day, every day. Are we not compounding our problem here? What do we do?
We are indeed. We are compounding the problem. And you're going to get, just like in everybody's security operations center, you're going to get fatigued, right? People don't care that much anymore because it's, we in the security industry, we're already banding around the phrases. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. This trickles down to your end user and they're being battered by phishing tests left, right, and center. They're going to get tired. And the objective of the industry today is to make, to push a product. To push a product, you have to make the fishes more realistic. The more realistic you make them, the more likely it is that somebody is going to fail due to the fatigue they already have about looking out for these things. So what do you do? I don't know that there is too much we can do in these situations. The one thing that I've always been an advocate of is tailoring phishing that you do, or tailoring the types of awareness that you do for the role in particular. So the person that works in finance is unlikely to start seeing I would say an Atlassian GitHub type, phishing attempt, right? Tailor it to the job that they do, because for sure, when your malicious attacker is trying to exploit the user, they are going to tailor it towards something people that get hit with these business email compromise scams, the email is not going to the head of IT, is it? It's actually going into the accounting department. So tailoring these trainings to specific bodies within the organization, I believe, can go a long way to sort of helping this and alleviate some of the fatigue that people will be experiencing.
Okay, so we need to tailor our campaigns, our drip campaigns over time to reduce the fatigue on people and make it meaningful for them to match that what's in it.
Yes,
me.
Indeed.
Now, everyone
this is one of the ways, right? Probably I do have some notes as to other things I would do in different situations, but this is just one of the ways, and it's not a panacea by itself, right? You'd have to combine this with a variety of other bits and pieces in order for it to truly be effective. And like anything else, you have to suck it and see. What's right for one organization may not necessarily be right for another organization, depending on what that organizational culture is like.
And speaking of that culture, one of our points that we've discussed in the past as well has been very interesting, because everyone focusing in on the end point here, the end user being attacked. And yes, that's going to ramp. The activities ramped, the technology is ramped, the depth of the way things can be faked or adapted can be ramped. So this is going to get insane. It's the only word I can think of right now. And we need to cast our mind, though, into the other end of the organization if we take that defense in depth, which is the developers. Tell me about what you were thinking about developer culture, Trey, because I've had a couple of very interesting conversations of late with some CTOs around the world who have shared their view in support of ours that DevSecOps is not a case of placing gates in and scanners in code. It's a cultural thing. So we've got our end user community, but what are we doing about the developer and the code and the pipeline?
So I agree 100%. It is a cultural thing, and the culture of an organization really dictates how your developers in that organization behave. So let's juxtapose two different imaginary organizations. You've got one organization who ensures that everybody is draconian. Let's say it's draconian, right? They're draconian, and everybody follows established processes, uses established libraries, doesn't deviate from what has already been prescribed. Then you've got this other organization where they're primarily given the freedom to experiment, to test new things and do new things. You take this to these two organizations, and you take the objective of any business that is building a product. What's the objective? The primary objective: get it to market quick, scale it quick. Now, you take these two organizations, which one do you think is going to scale and work faster?
We're rewarded for creating tech debt, aren't we? Essentially.
Correct. But it's that same organization that's going to be creating the tech debt, because they're going to be moving quickly. They're going to be experimenting quickly. And security, the first person you hire in an organization is not a security person, is it? No, right? With no product, there's no need for security. So let's build a product. And the organization that is flexible, that is agile, where the developers are free to experiment and use experimental things to get this product to market to achieve the company objective, right, is going to generate a lot of tech debt. Not saying the other company won't, but this company will do. But that's what you want to do, because that's what your objective is, to bring a product to market. And we mustn't forget that. So at what point do we start to switch our minds back to, okay, we've built this fantastic product, we've gotten some market share, we need to maintain market share. When do we make the call to start addressing this tech debt? Because at some point, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you are fighting with your developers to fix the security issues that are inherent within the platforms that have been built out, with the processes, with the applications themselves. And when this fight starts to happen, you do the next best thing, which is what you said right at the beginning: put this tool in place, do that, do this. Are we scanning here? Are we scanning there? And you have this hodgepodge of a mess. So for me, if I was ever in a situation where I was, and this is something that I've been doing with a couple of companies, startup companies in Africa. I do cybersecurity advisory, and it is not advising them how to manage cybersecurity in the organization. It is more about, these are the cybersecurity challenges you are likely to face at some point in the future when your product has been developed. And this is how you address them. All the cloud providers today have a fantastic, they have fantastic documentation around how you should build on the cloud. And Amazon has one in particular, and it's called the Well-Architected Framework. Doesn't matter where you're starting out. These are things you need to consider when you start building your application. And it's easily digestible by anybody. You don't have to be a security expert to digest this information. And if people can do that, if I had the opportunity to lead an organization, I would do exactly that. And that's the advice I give today, right?
Love it, because unpacking what you've just said and taking it forward, fighting the developers does not, will never work. Creating friction through gates and saying, aha, we caught you, you can't do these things. We lose them on the journey. It will not work. The 80-20 role of risk in this is really interesting, though. So as you've been talking, you mentioned earlier libraries, safe libraries. Now, this is very interesting because it can work really well. Imagine then we create our organization. It is starting out as 10, 20, few hundred people, maybe, in a workshop. If we think of it as a workshop, if these people are tasked with going and building an X, whatever that X is, they will go to the hardware store. They will go and get anything that they need to make this work. However, if we lay out some benches and put some cool tools in there, the master chef, if you like, what do? They're not going to put in rubbish ingredients. They allow some great ingredients, great tools in the workshop. What do people do? Path of least resistance, go pick those up. Why don't we lay out some sensible, already pre-audited libraries and then go, fill your boots, there it is.
Yes,
grab them.
Indeed.
What are they going to do?
Indeed. Well, they'll do exactly that. But let's be pragmatic about the situation. The environment in which we work in is fast-paced and fast-moving. A library that exists today that was the best cutting-edge library is not necessarily the same library for tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And the new library may be 100 times faster, but may not necessarily have been vetted. What do you do? Where do you make this call? I guess this is where discussion of risk comes into play, right? But at the time you're making these having these discussions, you may not even have a risk manager to help guide this, right? You may not have a risk manager to help guide this conversation. But again, it is knowing what can happen. So for an organization that is not in this position right now, just partaking in this conversation that we're having, knowing that it is, these types of things can happen, they can start to plan for them.
Very interesting. Use case came up yesterday around this. I love the phrase pluralistic ignorance. A group of people, and it applies to developers here in a positive way, that they, as a group, they don't know why. So you make a decision. Let's say one of your libraries is a bigger, better, faster, more library that comes out, but as you say, not vetted correctly, Trey. They grab it. And there's a risk decision, even if it's done really well. A decision is made to use it, and even a tag, we'll come back to it later. Great. Isn't it amazing, though, and this came up yesterday, as I say, that decision had been made incredibly sensible, incredibly well thought through. However, the follow-up and the review got lost because it stayed with someone rather than in a system. Tell me your thoughts about how we systemize this and capture these points, meeting the spirit of growth and achievement, but still capturing the stuff of the debt, if you like.
The simple answer is, not having it in a system is a bad idea. You lose you lose the historical information associated with the original decision that was made. You may lose the scope of the actual issue in itself.
Mm.
A system doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as a spreadsheet application, right? It could be Word, it could be Sheets, it could be pretty much anything. I wouldn't advise using Apple's product though. Not that their product for Sheets is terrible, but maybe not in this case. However, it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as a spreadsheet, and you put all the information into that spreadsheet, and you periodically review the spreadsheet with, the people you need to review it with. Having it in somebody's mailbox or sitting on somebody's sort of like hard drive or something like that doesn't really help the situation, especially if that person then leaves. How do you know where they've stored all of this information? So centralizing it is fantastic. It is good. It enables a lot of visibility for people that are maybe interested in, how the decision came to be, what the actual follow-up actions need to be, right? But also just having this spreadsheet without any rules on how it needs to be used within the organization, without having the right sort of policies in place that empower the information or empower the decision making around what you do with that spreadsheet, it suddenly just becomes a worthless piece of paper, right? So if you don't have a policy in place that says this spreadsheet containing all of this stuff needs to be reviewed periodically every 6 months, then it's kind of pointless, right? But we talked a little bit about compliance in one of our conversations, and it's an interesting segue, because the compliance aspect of this is review the spreadsheet. Is the spreadsheet reviewed every 6 months?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
Right.
So,
but have you addressed the issues?
Well, therein lies it, doesn't it? The as you say, the sort of walking out of the door of tacit knowledge, and who owns it, and those things. Trey, fascinating as always. What we'll do is move this into a second part for everyone. So, for the moment, thank you. And
no problems at all. Thank you very much.
Next time on our compliance side.
Most definitely. Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me.